Okay, it's 1 past, and we've got quite a few of you joining us already. So we might as well get started. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining this session on what's working, sharing experiences on generative AI and teaching and learning. My name is Hassan Khosravi. I'm associate professor here at UQ, with my own research also being focused on the use of AI in education. I'm delighted to be chairing today's session. Before we start, a quick acknowledgement of country that UQ acknowledges the traditional owners and their custodians of the land with which we meet, and we pay our respects to their ancestors, descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connection to country, and we recognize their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. Okay, so we're talking about generative AI today, and probably currently the most well-known application of generative AI is ChatGPT, as we're going to be hearing from 4 presentations today in terms of how it's being used in education. If you're not familiar with it, it's an intelligent chat box created by OpenAI that uses an underlying language model to interact in a conversation way. This is kind of my image of what ChatGPT looks like. This is also generated by AI Work. It's a friendly and happy chatbot sitting in a nice place, working with a computer, looking awesome. The dialogue format makes it possible for ChatGPT to answer follow-up questions, admit questions, challenge incorrect premises, and reject inappropriate requests. And it is a changing landscape. Essentially, what we get today might be very different to what we see from generative AI and ChatGPT, even towards later this year. As of today, it is still free to create an account and interact with ChatGPT. If you haven't done so already, I would encourage you to have a play around with it in terms of your own course to see how it might make sense to use it or not in your own teaching. Its applications in education have been widely talked about. I wouldn't say widely adopted yet because it's a very new landscape, but discussions that I've seen have talked about how it can be used in writing essays, lesson plans, learning objectives, class syllabus, step-by-step solutions to problems or question assignment questions, creating assessment items, designing rubrics for your course, writing video scripts for educational content that you might be writing, or drafting quick emails to students to provide feedback. In terms of today's agenda, we've got 4 presentations scheduled. We'll hear from Axel, Angela, Emily, and Lyn about their experiences. For the 4 presentations, I would greatly appreciate it if we can have, so 10 minutes for each. We'll aim for 6 minutes of presentation with 4 minutes for questions to follow up for each of the questions. If you do have any questions, feel free to just raise your hand virtually to ask those questions, or just write your questions in the chat and we'll take it from there. Then I'll pass it to Elsa from the to talk a little about generative AI and Turnitin, as it's a new feature coming up, and then we'll finish with a short survey at the end. While we're hearing from 4 presentations, we would very much love to also hear your own experiences if you've been using generative AI. So we do have a Padlet link, and I'll appreciate Dom or Karen if you can put the link in the chat. It might already be there, but essentially we want to also hear from you. What have you tried? What have you learned? How would you do things differently? And there is a series of these what's working and what's not working sort of series that we want to put. If you are interested in presenting one of the future events, please do let us know by just writing your information there. All right, without any further ado, let's move on to the first presentation. Axel, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'm Axel from the School of Economics. The reason why I'm joining here is basically because I had been thinking for quite a while on how to ensure that students become real experts in their fields instead of just parroting what they've done or what possibly someone else has done for them. So I'm interpreting AI fairly general. You will see my journey started years ago already with these problems, even before AI. So I just translate it as another intelligence. So I don't care too much if students use AI as a chatbot or Bing chat, or if they have a PhD father, or if they pay another student for their work. I don't mind that much at all, as long as the student is learning and becomes an expert afterwards. So that's basically what I'm after. Currently, I've got in my ECP this little blob here. So students are free to use AI or whatever help they want for preparing their assessments, their presentations in my case. But in the end, they need to be able to really understand what they've done there. So where's my journey coming from? I've got here in light gray something that really didn't work. That was even before COVID. I had an external course and I've allowed students that were overseas to video record their presentations instead of making a live presentation and submit a recorded presentation. And that was an absolute flop in my opinion, because there were plenty of students that were obviously just reading a script that they have most likely not prepared themselves at all. Often there was just some summary from the internet somewhere, and it was clear that they didn't understand anything. So I've learned out of that one, for sure, if I do presentation, they need to be live. Live includes Zoom, so they don't need to be on campus, but it needs to be live Zoom. So that's what I did in the second step. We switched over to live Zooms. And we introduced Q&A too, where we can clarify things that I didn't understand during the presentation. And initially, the idea for Q&A was also to have active discussions with my students. Sorry, I just lost the slides. I'm not quite sure if this one was on my side or... So I want to have active discussions with my students, and I didn't want to have students freaking out in the oral presentations. That's the reason why I initially started with only bonus marks. But then with the arrival of COVID and the loss of exams, these presentations became more and more important as a true invigilated assessment to ensure that the students are truly the ones that do have the expertise and don't get simply all the work from somewhere else. So then I had to crank it up a notch, and now I really have to find my own slides again. So I'm not quite sure why I've lost them. Let me see, Zoom. There they are again. Good, thank you. So even if I didn't allow students to use notes, to my surprise, they memorized. Some of the students obviously memorized whole scripts. And if you've never done oral live presentations, you can literally hear if someone has a memorized script or if someone is talking freely. It just sounds completely different. But the point is, of course, you can't prove it that they have memorized the script. It's all in their head. So if they find something, or if they have a ghostwriter, or if they used AI, memorize what AI told them, rattle it down, it sounds great. You wouldn't be able to prove anything there. So that made me think, okay, I have to change the marking guide again, because during Q&A with bonus time, it turned out there were some students that had great talks, didn't have a clue what they were talking about. It was obvious in Q&A then. So then I made Q&A prerequisites or essential for earning the marks. So this is how I'm currently running it, so that they can't use notes, either from AI, from someone else, from someone typing, their own notes on the wall. I let them stand far away from the screen so you can see their whole body. And that way it becomes much more obvious if they have any external help during the live presentation. Next thing is Q&A. So the student needs to perform well or good enough in Q&A in order to earn the marks. So if they initially sounded quite knowledgeable and like a true expert, but then I'll ask them a question about their own topic, about the stuff that they just told me. Just say slight variation. Okay, what happens if the opposite of this, your assumption, is true? How would that affect your analysis? Or why did you analyze this and this and this way? And if the student cannot answer these questions, they simply can't gain the marks. The reason here is the following. I want them to become experts. I don't want them to parrot something that they found somewhere else on AI or somewhere else. I want them to truly understand. That's the reason why I've got this. Now, I'm pretty happy with this. What I've learned out of that one, what didn't work so well, maybe. So in general, this works fantastic. It's not only my own opinion, but I've got a team of markers. They like that too. So I train tutors to do this, shadowing with me. They're very strong at it. And with the requirement of more invigilation, there's now 3 other colleagues that use it too. So Temeskin, Christoph, and Priscilla use a similar system. Priscilla actually very similar in her large first year class to me. So she's also using presentations with Q&A. And Temesca and Christoph use it the following way. Students are submitting their work beforehand, but then cases that are more or less suspicious are invited for an oral examination, and they have to then make clear during the oral examination that what they've submitted beforehand is truly built on their own expertise, that they can explain their own work. And if they can't, they're basically failing. And that seems to have worked quite well for all of these colleagues as well. The only problem that I felt is some students get quite agitated. So they've got these shiny presentations, great slides, by and large, it's all correct what's on the slides too. But then they're failing because in Q&A, they couldn't answer any of the questions. And some students are then getting quite challenging, really. But that's just me. I have to stand my ground. What would I do differently? I already emphasized that to the students beforehand, that the ability to explain these things is incredibly important. So I'm not quite sure what I would improve on this one. And I just see right now that my 7 minutes are already up. So I'll finish here and I'm waiting for your questions.
Thank you so much, Axel. If there are any questions, do feel free to virtually raise your hand or write the questions in the chat. While we are waiting for that, I really like the approach of decoupling learning, learn in any way that you want, use whatever AI tools that you want, and the actual assessment, which is, given that it's interactive, you can kind of probe to see if they've actually learned it or not. So that's not a problem. That they've submitted something and you might be feeling, that they might have had it from somewhere else. I guess my main question would be, what type of classes or courses do you think this would work well with? Especially with large classes, it might be hard to sort of have these interactive orals designed as an assessment item with 8 to 1,000 students in it. But do you have characteristics of the course in mind in which
yes, so my course is 150 to 250 students. The colleagues' courses are going, I think, up to 1,000 students. So, of course, the course coordinator himself can't do all the oral examination. It's way too much work. The administration load, if you have individual oral examinations, is kind of okay. I would think, like we developed a software for a booking system where the students can just book their time for their oral exam when it suits them. It's a little bit fiddly admin work, but in the end, that can be solved via software and it's not too much. Now, you might think that the marking of oral exams is very time intensive. I would say it's the exact opposite. So compared to reading an essay or reading an exam, it's much quicker. So, and I invite anybody who wants to come along to one of my presentations or the colleagues' presentations. Within 2 or 3 minutes, you get a pretty good idea how much the students already know. It's going incredibly fast.
Yeah. We've got a question in the chat from Michael. As we may know, to get the most out of ChatGPT, students need to be able to ask high quality questions. Does it mean that the assessment requirement as well as the learning goals should also take that into account?
So I was talking to colleagues. I personally don't teach my students yet to prompt ChatGPT or any of the other AI. I have to learn it myself much better too, I have to say. Until last week, I was not too much of a fan of the AI thing itself. I saw it more of a danger because it looks like an expert has written it, but only to non-experts. So we easily can see where the errors are in the answers. Students cannot, because students are right now becoming experts. That's the whole point of going to university, in my opinion. So they can't judge the output of ChatGPT. So there's a real danger there that they just swallow whatever it comes out there as the truth. Now, should we teach our students how to prompt AI? I feel that would be quite a useful thing to do. I haven't done it yet. I've spoken to other colleagues. Is it the core of what we're teaching in our classes? I don't think so. I think they still need to become experts in their field, not just an expert at prompting. So there comes the question if they should have a prompting class, maybe in year 1, like just a class how to use the library or how to use the computer. Or if you want to have the prompt teaching in our classes, I can tell you what I think I will do in the future is that I will identify tasks in my class that are good for AI, and they're usually not core. there on the side, and tasks that are less good for my class. So for example, I want my students to be experts at analyzing things in my banking class regarding banking, but they don't need to be an expert in econometrics. That's what they teach and learn in other classes. And as far as I know, AI can do very basic econometrics. So I'm perfectly fine for students to use AI to do the econometrics, but then they have to analyze the output that comes out there with the banking knowledge that they've learned in my class. So that's my intent for the future.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Misconduct question I can see here. Sorry, Carla. Always tricky. So in my class, I don't even make it as misconduct because I'm marking the expertise. I'm not marking the honesty. So if they can't answer the questions about their own presentation, they simply don't get presentation marks. And if they're complaining later that they had a shiny slide set, I'm not marking the slide set. I'm marking the student's expertise. So that's my way of doing it.
Thank you. And do please feel free to carry on the discussion on chat if there were any other questions coming your way. Thanks again for sharing that. Really helpful. We've got a quick agenda to move on to. So if Angela is here.
Yes. Hello, Hassan.
Over to you.
Okay. So I'm just looking at the slide. It doesn't come up then one line at a time, the way I saved it. It's just all coming up all together.
Mostly due to the timing that we only have 5 minutes for the presentation. It would have probably taken too much time to go through step by step across all of the slides.
All right then. Okay. Right. So a couple of weeks before the beginning of semester, I was just lying around, relaxing, twiddling my thumbs, thinking, oh, ho hum, haven't done much course redevelopment in the last 3 years. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks before the start of semester, I heard about ChatGPT and I thought, oh, great. This gives me just the impetus I need to do a major overhaul of one of my courses. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Chin 2750 Fundamentals in English to Chinese Translation, which attracts close to 200 enrollments per semester. About 97% of these are international Chinese students. Our assessment has been, still is, 20% weekly Blackboard exercises, 30% mid-semester exam, 50% final translation exam. I didn't want to go down the road of asking my students not to use ChatGPT because if they're doing their assessments online, it's obvious that they will use it. The weekly exercises, we've added a few questions, but they're fairly similar to previous semesters. The final translation exam, we actually have been working with Google Translate, Youdao, Baidu, DeepL, various machine translation software for several semesters now. We don't believe we need to change that final exam. However, I did see the need to change the mid-semester exam. So on the next slide, you can see our goal, which was to design a mid-semester exam that ChatGPT cannot pass, assuming that students would be sitting there wanting to copy and paste the questions over to ChatGPT. And on the next slide, you can see some of the action that we took to set this up. So the first thing was we ran all of our pre-existing mid-sem questions, which were in multiple different pools, through ChatGPT. What we found was that some pools of questions ChatGPT scored 100% on, and they tended to be, bearing in mind that our course is translation, the sort of what I think of as mechanical analysis questions like find all the verbs in this sentence or find the main clause in this sentence. With other question pools, there were mixed results. Overall, our impression was that ChatGPT does quite well on multiple choice, not so well on multiple answer, performs. So following on from what Axel just said, if you read the short answer responses carefully, you can see that there are flaws in them. However, in comparison with the short answers that students would give me in an exam under time pressure, ChatGPT performed pretty well at the short answer questions. Not so good at context dependency. And ChatGPT is not written as a machine translation software. So actually its translation capabilities are no better, we have found, than existing machine translation. Okay, so what did we do? If you click on, yes, exactly. So some of those easy pools we just got rid of. Some of which were ones that I had been thinking getting rid of anyway. Some we retained so that students could have some easy questions. We converted some multiple choice to multiple answer. We took some of the old short answer questions, knowing that ChatGPT was going to perform better than students on those. We converted those to multiple choice, multiple answer, or matching. And we added a lot more questions that required contextual analysis. And I'll show you some examples of those. And we also prepared 3 different mock exams and a 12-page step-by-step guide on exactly how many questions would be on the exam, on what topics, and what format they would take. Okay, so next slide. Yes, multiple answer means more than correct response. Exactly. So the problem that I can just see a question in the chat box. One problem that we discovered, and who knows if ChatGPT has this problem with all subject areas. I don't know how it performs in the sciences, for example. In languages, with our field, when we asked it select 2 correct responses, it often gave us 3 or 4. It didn't seem to want to restrict itself to the number that we required. Okay, so you can see this slide, which is taken from our week 3 PowerPoint. And I think it's pretty obvious that the first sentence is comparing revenge with love, and the second sentence is comparing plays with poems. That kind of contextual analysis seems to be a bit challenging at the moment for ChatGPT. It may well improve. Next slide, please. She doesn't work hard because she wants to earn more. I think as humans, when we read that sentence with our knowledge of the world, we realize the meaning is different from, because she wants to earn more, she doesn't work hard. So the Chinese machine translation analyzes it that way, but in fact, we understand that it means she works hard, not because she wants to earn more, but for some other reason. So again, another example of having to understand the context and the human logic. Next slide. And this was another example. If you just move on to the next slide, the actual tricky bit is that's previous one with the anticipated collapse on Tuesday. Does it mean last Tuesday or next Tuesday? Does it mean that the collapse happened on Tuesday or the anticipation of the collapse happened on Tuesday? Those sorts of questions which we as humans understand from our knowledge of the world or the contextual information, it was a bit challenging. Yep, next slide. This is an example of a new question that we added, asking students to translate an idiom. What more proof do we need that music making is a force for good, a shortcut to all-round improvement to spiritual, mental, physical and social health? The provision of it a financial stitch in time. And if you look at the next slide, it shows you the information that was given to the student on the guide, which included the example question. You can see in the first line, I'm suggesting to students, if they're not sure how to translate idioms, they should refer to those various materials that are all on the Blackboard course site. Here's the example question, here is how you would answer it, and here's a tip or a hint. So the result of all of these modifications, and again, this is for our field, which is translation. We haven't finished marking the mid-semester exam. We ran it last week. So I'm just going on the questions that were automatically marked by Blackboard. and that we tested on ChatGPT. Out of those 40 questions, ChatGPT scored 15 out of 40, and students on average scored 26 out of 40. So we were quite pleased that we managed to design the exam with that result. Any questions?
Thank you so much. Yeah, really, really great work. We have time for one question, if anybody has questions, and then maybe, Angela, you can follow up on any other questions that may come via the chat.
Yep.
Or any hands up. I can start while you're doing this, and I found this slide really helpful, essentially about what the response was in terms of what you've done, because I think that translates well to any other course that has a similar goal in terms of trying to make their exams ChatGPT sort of
resistant.
Yeah, anything. Exactly. So this is to me a step that pretty much any course that has some sort of exam can take, and look at what they've done before and look at how it could be changed to really make it ChatGPT proof. I haven't seen any questions come through. Some of these are harder, I guess, to contextualize in other courses because a lot of this was on translation. Other than change from MCQ to MAQs, would you have one other suggestion in terms of that bulletproofing that you might want to share?
Yeah, well, I think for us, I mean, I was really fascinated that ChatGPT seems to struggle, at least for the sort of skills that we're testing, it seems to struggle more with multiple answer and even multiple choice questions than with short answer. And yeah, which I find, I think it's because you don't have time in the pressure of an exam to write a really detailed, well thought out response, and ChatGPT just blurts it out in 3 seconds flat.
Yeah.
So I think that's a little bit different from Axel's experience, isn't it? Because your students have a lot more time for preparation, Axel. Yeah.
Yes, my sound is off, but my students can prepare for weeks, and then they have the presentation, and then in the Q&A, of course, they have to react on the spot.
Yeah, right.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that. Thanks for sharing. It's great to hear that it was successful and ChatGPT miserably failed the new midterm. All right, gonna move on to Emily. Before we do, can I suggest, if you do have anything you would like to share, I'm just gonna put the link one more time in the chat. We would love to hear if you've tried anything else, what you've learned and what you do differently. And we would also love to invite you to come and talk to us in the next session from the series on what's working. Without further ado, Emily, over to you.
Thanks so much, Hassan. I want to preface my section on saying that a lot of this comes from some of the work of Chris DeLuca in assessment literacy. So I'm here from the School of Education. And of course, as you can imagine, we're teaching teachers how to not just respond to us, but also so that they start to think like we do as assessors and as markers into their future. So this particular activity that I've done is something I have done in the past, but as I'm relatively new to UQ, I don't have the wealth of exemplars to draw from. So when starting this course, I wanted to give the students an opportunity to really engage in the task. Because as Chris DeLuca talks about, task sheets, criteria sheets, rubrics, they're all very dense text that has really loaded language in it that means something to the person who wrote it. Sometimes it means the same things to people marking it, but at times, until we have that dialogue and conversation about what those words really mean, they won't feel, they won't naturally be obvious to our students what it is we're looking for. So in this particular activity, what I try to do is take an exemplar into the classroom for students to use to mark themselves using the criteria sheet, and then ask them what they are finding. What's the evidence they're seeing in the student work in front of them? So without exemplars, I thought this was a great opportunity to use ChatGPT and see what it could do, and popped the assignment task into ChatGPT. Now I say it was version 3. I know version 4 is quite more sophisticated, so I'll be interested to run that again soon and see what happens. And used what it produced as the exemplar. I took it into the lecture, so I had 95 students who were given the assessment, the piece, the exemplar, and the criteria sheet. And I asked them to mark this live during the session. And if we pop to the next slide, Hassan, you can see some of the students marking, because I used an application, a web-based application called Slido, which allows you to live gather evidence or gather people's responses. So I gave them the 7-point scale and asked them to mark it. And then we stopped and paused on each criteria and had a conversation about what's the evidence that we found? What's the difference perhaps between that 3 and that 4? So I actually asked the students, who gave this task a 3? Who gave it a 4? Tell me why it was a 4, using the language of the criteria sheet that's in front of you. Then what's that difference? What's that point-outable or discernible difference in the criteria sheet between the 3 and the 4 that's in the criteria, and ask them why, got some of that response to why. And as you can see, they gave it they didn't really like its infographic that it started to produce. They were much happier with its essay, and they really did not like its referencing, which I thought was really interesting. If I can pop back to that slide, Hassan, please, I'll give you a bit of the insight into what the students were thinking. So from the activity, they really started to think about what was the task asking them to do? What was the task what were they needing to show? What sort of evidence were they needing to give of their knowledge of scientific literacy? So this is a first year science and technology course. What was the most interesting conversation, or where the most interesting conversation was held, was in the referencing. I actually started to ask them, why is it so bad? What is it that you're saying is terrible here? The first one, of course, was that it didn't give any in-text referencing, and they really wanted to see that. But the second part that I found really interesting was when they came to the reference list, and ChatGPT did give a reference list. A lot of it was government-based, web-based type references, so grey literature rather than actually peer-reviewed literature. There was one piece of peer-reviewed literature, or so it said. And when we really drilled in on that, what we found was that the 2 researchers were researchers in the field. The journal was a legitimate journal in the field, but the actual article was completely fabricated. It just made it up. So that gave a really good opportunity to talk about the limitations and benefits of using this to support your thinking and support you starting that process of coming up with a response to a question, but that you need to bring in your critical thinking to ensure that what is being produced or what you're submitting actually has some credibility to the response that you're being asked to provide. So I guess if I think about what I'd do differently, I will certainly be doing this activity in each of the assessment tasks, because I really do feel very strongly as an educator that this gives an opportunity for the students to understand what I am looking for in order for them to show that success in this subject or in any of my subjects. But I'm going to need to be critical myself about my task design. It's going to need to show, as both Axel and Angela talked about, it needs to show that thinking, a level of thinking that's not just providing back some of the information that we have given to them already. It needs to be something deeper. And therefore my criteria tasks, the criteria sheets, I should say, should very much explicitly state that. I really need to go in and strip out those things where I'm asking them about things that I know ChatGPT can already do. So I know that I can pop a reference list, no matter how bad it is, into ChatGPT and ask it to APA 7 it, and it will provide it to me perfectly. So that sort of skill that's in the communication component, for instance, that's not something that's going to show me their ability. What I need to do is talk to them about critical texts the things that I want to see, peer-reviewed literature, and showing me that real depth of research and understanding, not just what they've found and what they can give back to me. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for that. Really insightful to see how it was used for AI-generated exemplars. Any virtual hands ups for questions or questions in the chat? Capable analyzing. There's a few comments in the chat. Rather than questions on the referencing, I'll note that essentially what has happened with generative AI is that they keep a summary of what they've seen across the internet. And as part of that summarization, they can't figure out where it's come from because they've kind of put it all together in one place. So what you see, as you indicated, is you see names that are in the field, you see journal names that are in the field, but it's all fabricated because they actually don't know where it's coming from. So that's quite exciting. And I think what I really like about this is that it really can be used across different disciplines, different faculties, as something that could happen in any courses. Do you see a way that this could be assessed in any way, Emily? I mean, I'm assuming this was not part of their assessment and it was something an active learning class activity.
It was an in-class activity. So we did it with the whole cohort in one room, which gave us an opportunity to moderate with the tutors in there as well, which was a really good way for us all to be on the same page with what we were looking for. I think it's something we can do, particularly for us in education. When we're looking at assessment courses, we're trying to teach this sort of best practice as to what constitutes assessment literacy. So I think there's certainly opportunities for us to make use of it. I think it's something that could augment, say, Axel's work in looking at how students are supporting that initial work that they're doing in preparation for their oral presentations, for instance.
Sorry about that. I had a question also about the infographic information criteria. Can you talk a little about what that was?
Yeah, sure. So what they're asked to do in this particular task is a science essay that's based on a current, really something that's in the media or a hot topic in science. So it's an example that they can bring into their teaching. They are asked to provide a persuasive, basically a persuasive essay, something that where they're staking a claim and giving the evidence as well as the oppositional view. And then provide an infographic so that it's not just an essay, perhaps that something like ChatGPT could create, but also the infographic that supports how you could inform a community or talk to the students about what they were doing or what they were thinking. Interestingly, you can still pop that into something like ChatGPT, even though it doesn't create images. It gives you the instructions basically to design the infographic. And I found that really interesting and was able to create what it told me and take that in to talk to the students. Now, as I said, they didn't really like it. It was very white text. They thought it was a bit boring, which I didn't take offense at, of course, because I said it was someone else's thoughts, it was chat. But it gave them something to at least respond to on those criteria.
For sure. And, you know, as it's been mentioned in the chat as well, with ChatGPT 3.5 or even 4, which is now a paid subscription, it'll be interesting to see to what extent these results would change and how much it has improved. And also with use of other tools which create generative AI infographics rather than you taking it and creating it on your own, sort of prompting it to other tools to create it. That would also be interesting to see if that increases the score. Thank you once again for sharing that. If there were any other questions, please feel free to have that discussion over the chat as we'll move on to the fourth presentation for today. Lyn, over to you.
Hello. So my course was a summer semester course. It has internal and external enrollments. It has cross-institutional enrollments and also some non-degree enrollments as well. And this exam was held in January, just as the time that ChatGPT was all over the news and with the university starting to make comment on on its use and so on. So the purpose of the final exam is to be an authentic assessment based on workplace best practice. And so the course is aiming to get students to the standard required at the entry point to a job in biosecurity, agricultural, pest identification, biodiversity assessment, general public identifications like at a volunteer at a museum or something like that, or for citizen science works for biodiversity identification. So for 10 years now, I've been running a fully open book exam, which is what the practitioners in those areas would do. They have every resource available to them to try to do identifications to a level required for the job. This year it was, for most years since COVID, it's not been invigilated because it is open book, and online that's very difficult to have invigilated with but all resources available, but the students are told that they're not to use human assistance. So the exam, thinking about the ChatGPT this year in particular, we've been using computer vision AI for quite a few years. So the ChatGPT was the new entry into the area that students might be able to use. It's had some questions in the exam where computer vision gives the wrong answer. So we're talking about insects, and there's between 3 and 30 million insects. So the AI is not yet at the stage of being able to correctly identify things. So used some where computer vision gave the wrong answer, some where ChatGPT returned non-applicable answers. So the answers were correct in respect of the organisms, but not correct in respect of the organism or the specimen in front of the students. And some questions that needed bespoke material. So unpublished keys that are not available on the web that we use in class for practicing particular techniques. And the students needed to use that in the exam as well. So in addition to doing the identifications, the students also were asked to give justification and verification of their answers, and to cite the sources of the information that they used and the resources that they used. And that's 50% of the entire exam. They can get an answer correct, but they will only get pass mark or just below if they can't do the justification and verification of that answer. So what do I learn from this January experience? Most of the students used AI to some level for their exam, but most of them appeared to use it for only one or a few answers. Computer vision was used the most, and students who used it cited it, which I took as a general acceptance that computer vision is acceptable, and it's the thing that's used in citizen science work where people, so lots of people are using computer vision, and the students acknowledged it. ChatGPT was used in verifications and justifications, but it was rarely cited. In fact, only one student out of all the series of exams cited ChatGPT, even though it was obvious that some had been using it. And some of that, I think, was the stigma associated with its use in January, where it was all over the media. And also some of the students cited other sources that they actually used something else instead of ChatGPT, but it was obvious because those other sources could not have provided an answer. There was an over-reliance on the AI by some students, especially of ChatGPT, and they had the largest proportion of failures ever, 3 times the proportion of failures this year. And given that we also had the best marks at the same time, so a higher proportion were doing better, which I consider good, probably because they were using the AI well, but those trying to attempt the new technology there did very badly. So AI could pass the course if it weren't for the bespoke materials and for the section about justification of verification. What I'd do differently, I think because of the failures, I would put more emphasis on good practice of using AI. It's really important that the students can use it because it's what's expected in the workplace. And we want to be able to assess whether they're using it well or not. So those who failed the original exam, some sat a supplementary exam, and in between time, I had a session on how to be using AI well, and all of the students ended up passing the course from verifications done correctly and citing their sources. Because the AI is so good at doing the work now, we need to lift our standards, not to try and catch the students out, but because more is possible. And so bring it closer to a higher level of skill in a workplace, such that somebody who might already be working there for a little while can get to. And I think that's now possible because of the AI. And so we need to adjust our level of expectation and which resources we expose the students to so that they can continue to develop. One thing I do have concerns about is that the exam is open to collusion or impersonation because it's mixed online and in person. Can't invigilate either of those. I'm not sure how to run them, and but I'm also not sure whether it's needed at this stage. I'd be happy taking suggestions on that too.
Thank you so much, Lyn, for sharing that. As with the previous ones, questions very welcome. Both virtual hands up to ask them or through chats. Dom, would you like to ask to read it out, or would you like me to read it out?
Sure. Thanks, Hassan. Thank you, Lyn. I really appreciate the presentation. Some great insights from getting to teach over summer. So I heard, and I don't know, I just want to verify that I heard correctly and ask for some more comments. This idea that capable students supplementing their abilities with ChatGPT jump way ahead.
Yep.
While if you're not capable and you try and rely on a generative AI, you fall behind.
That's exactly the interpretation I had. And because I was exposed to a lot of the students face-to-face for a week, I got to know them really well. It really fitted my expectations in that way. Yep.
Thank you.
I was taking it a little different, but it's good that Dom, you asked the question. I was wondering if students' AI literacy is sort of having a big impact in terms of whether they're failing or actually they're really exceeding in the course rather than their knowledge of the content of the course and the learning objectives of the course. And if that's the case, then we might need to look at it differently.
Yeah, I see that as a possibility, but we used the AI during class, and the basics they were all capable of doing from those activities. Individually capable of doing it. So that's partly why I think it was from the other knowledge that they were lacking that they then resorted to using only the AI.
You might have mentioned, and I missed this, how tightly was the exam time? Was it like a 2-hour regular exam?
Yeah, so it's timed tightly, and it's set up so that it's time pressured, so that there's not. Yeah, so the number of questions, if you know the material or you've practiced using resources, you can do it easily in the time, or you can do it in the time, but if you don't know your material and haven't practiced using the resources, you'll be time stretched and not finished. So it also stretches students out on that dimension as well.
Yeah, and that might have also contributed to the higher failure if you're getting engaged with conversations with AI trying to find the right answer. You lose track of time and there'll be questions you don't answer. I do wonder if you change it so that it is not time pressured and, they have a longer period, whether that would be a better pedagogical approach to give them more time for the conversations and take that into account or not.
I don't think that was the case because the answering, almost all students answered all questions. But the quality of the answers were definitely different.
Okay.
There was only 1 or 2 questions not answered, say.
I don't see any hands up or questions coming in. So thank you, Lyn, once again for sharing that, and look forward to hearing how things go after that. There was one more general question from an RE that, if we want to check it out, then ChatGPT or GPT-4 is not free. Who's going to pay for us to check whether the content can come from GPT-4 or not? Really good question. Unfortunately, I don't have the right answer for that, but it is, I think, a good question to ask. Yeah, please feel free to expand on that. And all right.
Yes, it goes further than just who's going to pay for this. And the reason I'm asking is quite often things I use in class I end up paying for, like Kahoot subscription of $260 per year. And I'm not going to start paying $20 now per month for a GPT-4. It also creates now inequality then in terms of students and assessments if we tell them they can use ChatGPT, because now we hear the free version doesn't pass the bar, the new version passes the bar. Okay, so can I really ask my students to use artificial intelligence if the one that will allow them to pass they have to pay for? So, this is actually creating a whole new aspect for me. So much so that I don't even want to use it in my course anymore. I was considering, giving them an example of what ChatGPT would do, but I'm not going to do it if, I have to worry about the paid versus unpaid version, the fact that the university isn't making it available to all of us, students and staff equally.
I appreciate
so actually one more thing, Hassan, I know it's not you that decide on it, but I think the university should now step back and decide how they're going to handle this before asking us to make all these changes to our assessment pieces.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think there's a lot more discussion needed to have around this. I would say that, in fairness, in terms of resources available, probably the same would be possible to argue that maybe one person has the funding and the money available to have a private tutor, whereas, working with them throughout the semester and another person doesn't have that funding, which kind of gives the same unfair advantage to them, but it's never been something that we've considered as something that we need to stop. But having said that, I do think it's important to think about these differences and who has the ability to pay for the more advanced AI and not, and how we need to take those into consideration as we think about assessing students. All right, we're getting close to the end. I've got two quick things for us to do. There is a quick survey that we want you to do. Maybe Dom, I think you've already passed the link to that in the chat. But while we're also having a look at that, Elsa, can I pass it over to you to talk about Turnitin Generative AI Writing Indicator?
Can you show all the dot points for that page as well? Thanks. And there's one more. Thank you. So Turnitin about 10 days ago announced that it's releasing a new generative AI writing detection indicator. So it's going to be released on the 5th of April at 4 AM Australia time. It's in the preview stage for 2023. So basically the AI indicator will be located within the similarity report. It's different to the similarity score. If you can see on the image, it will highlight the text with a high probability of being AI generated and give you a percentage. But it's separate to the similarity score, which of course is about text matching. It's only available to staff, so students will not be able to see this score. The UQ advice, and we've had very short notice, is that staff should only use this tool as an educative tool. So it'll give you some indication about the use of AI by the students, and that will help inform you giving feedback to the students on appropriate use and appropriate referencing, etc. And that's for this year because it is a preview. We'll be telling staff that a high score is insufficient insufficient evidence for an academic misconduct case investigation. It could be used as a red flag. You may want to get additional information, but the score in itself this year, when it's in preview, is insufficient evidence. We have a project page and we'll continue to update that project page as we learn more. So we'll invite people to check that out. If you can go to the next slide. So this is really new, so we'd really like to work with interested staff. So we're working with the e-learning team, be working with interested groups, the learning designers who are working in the field, academics working in the field, the central unit that looks after student academic misconduct, and the academic integrity officers as we learn about this tool together. And we really like your feedback because that will help us improve the advice we're giving to staff around, how to use this tool. Is it sufficient evidence? What approaches should I take, etc. And if you go to the next slide, we will be running workshops on this tool. So they're just a 1 hour workshop, so a 45-minute workshop with Q&A at the end. It'll give you a chance to have a play with the tool, look at some samples, have a discussion with other people coming along, and sort of give us some feedback. We're doing it in groups, so we're doing it and we'll sort of improve the workshop design as we go. So we're rolling it out to the learning designers first as a pilot, then to the academic integrity officers to get their feedback on what we should be covering in the workshop, then to the ADAs and teaching directors, and finally to the teaching staff. We will keep an eye on numbers and we'll increase the number of workshops if needed. And if you'd like a workshop just for your school, you can contact us at e-learning advisors, the email address, and we can organise a workshop for your particular school at a time that suits, or maybe just a short presentation if you don't want a full workshop. So also we need to madly test this tool on Wednesday. I've already messaged Emily Ross. If you've got any exemplars that you've created using AI, we'd love them, because otherwise we're going to have to generate them ourselves. We have asked AI if they've got, turn it in, if they've got any, but we don't seem to be able to get hold of the ones they've used for testing the tool. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you so much, Elsa. There was a question from Chris, but I think it's already been responded. Students will not be able to see the AI score, so that's only for staff.
Yeah, we haven't seen this tool yet. Our vendor rep hasn't seen the tool. It's basically being made available to everyone on Wednesday.
Thank you, Elsa, for that. I know we're getting very close to the end. Before we wrap it up, we have created a very quick sort of survey. We really would like to know where the larger UQ community is at in terms of familiarity with generative AI tools, how it's being used, how it's being used in assessment in your course, how do you think your students are engaging with it? If you could find the time to complete a few questions that are in the survey, it would really help us in getting a better sense of the landscape of how generative AI is being used at UQ. Can I start by thanking Karen and Dom for putting the session together. Thank you for leading the session and putting things together, the 4 presenters. It was wonderful to hear how you guys have been using generative AI in your own courses and your reflections and where to go from here. Everyone for your engagement and attending today's session. We will have 2 more sessions coming up. So if you're trying out things and you would like to tell us more about those, please do reach out to us and let us know. There was a link in the Padlet for you to let us know if you would like to present in a future session. With that, thanks everyone and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.